People always talk about destiny as if it whispers softly, but today it slammed into her like a crashing wave the moment she walked through his door. She never expected a simple babysitting job to jolt her heart so violently, yet something in the air felt wrong. Almost like a memory reaching out to grab her by the throat. As she stepped deeper inside, the cold stillness of his polished apartment clashed with a warmth she hadn't felt in years, as if this place knew her better than she knew herself. Why did the silence feel familiar? Why did her chest tighten with every breath? And why? Out of all homes in this city did she end up here? Her eyes drifted toward the small figure standing near the window, unaware that everything in her life was about to unravel. The moment she noticed what hung around the child's neck, she tried to steady her breathing as she followed him into the living room, pretending everything felt normal, even though her mind spun with questions she wasn't ready to face. The child watched her with a quiet curiosity that tugged at something deep inside. Something she thought she buried years ago. She told herself it was coincidence, that necklaces like that weren't rare, that life couldn't possibly twist back toward a moment she had fought so hard to forget. Yet, every glance toward the child made her heart race faster, as if her past had suddenly walked into the present and sat down beside her. He spoke in short, clipped sentences while giving her instructions, but she barely heard him. Her attention constantly drifting back to the necklace. She studied the child's mannerisms, the way she held her toy, the way she tilted her head when thinking, tiny habits that stirred memories she had locked away. The more she watched, the more impossible it became to shake the fragile hope breaking through the cracks of her fear. If she was wrong, she would lose nothing. But if she was right, everything she ever lost might be standing right in front of her. When she finally sat alone with the child, the silence between them felt soft instead of heavy. The girl's small voice drifted toward her like a distant melody, warming the room in a way nothing else had. The sweetness in her smile made Emma's chest ache with an emotion far too powerful to swallow. She wanted to ask 100 questions, but couldn't risk breaking the fragile moment forming between them, afraid that any wrong word might expose the storm building inside her. As the CEO prepared to leave, his daughter clung to the babysitter with a trust that felt instantaneous, almost destined. He paused at the door, watching them with a mixture of confusion and something he hadn't felt in years. A hint of relief. She felt the weight of his gaze, but her eyes stayed on the child, drawn as if by invisible threads. When the door closed behind him, the apartment fell into a quiet that seemed to hold its breath. And in that silence, she knew this was only the beginning of something far bigger than she could imagine. She tried to convince herself that one necklace couldn't possibly mean what she feared, but the thought clung to her like a shadow. Every small gesture from the child made her heart twist with memories she wished she could forget. She kept replaying the moment she first saw the necklace, wondering if destiny was playing a cruel trick or offering a second chance she wasn't ready for. As morning light filled the apartment, she watched the girl eat breakfast with quiet focus, and the feeling only grew stronger. Doubt crept in from every direction, and yet a fragile thread of hope tugged at her with every breath. He rushed around the apartment gathering his work files, barely noticing the storm brewing inside her. His voice carried the familiar edge of someone always late, always running from something they refused to face. She watched him move with a blend of exhaustion and determination, wondering how he managed to carry so much alone. But even as he hurried through his routine, she sensed something softer beneath the surface, a quiet ache that mirrored her own. She didn't know whether to trust it, yet it made her feel less like a stranger in his home. The girl tugged gently at her sleeve, breaking her from the swirl of thoughts that refused to quiet. Her small voice was soft, hesitant, but full of an innocence that sent a wave of warmth rushing through her. She smiled despite the unease inside her, letting the child pull her toward the living room. Every step felt heavier, as if her past and present were finally colliding in a place she could no longer run from. She didn't know what she feared more, the truth or the possibility that she was wrong. As they played together, she noticed how easily the child laughed with her, how naturally she reached for her, how quickly the space between them dissolved. It felt too natural, too familiar, as if years of separation were quietly stitching themselves back together. She tried to keep her emotions steady, but the tenderness in the girl's eyes made her feel as though she was staring into a piece of her own heart. Doubt still lived within her, but now it was tangled tightly with a hope she could no longer deny. When he returned home early, the sight of them together stopped him in the doorway. Something softened in his expression, something he wasn't used to showing. She felt his gaze but didn't know how to meet it, afraid he might see the questions she kept buried. The child ran to him and then back to her, as if she belonged to both worlds without realizing it. It was a moment that tightened his chest and shook her balance, hinting at a truth none of them were prepared to face. And for the first time, doubt began to flicker in his eyes too. Days passed and the bond between them grew in quiet, natural ways that felt almost strange to her. She tried to keep her feelings guarded, but every time the child reached for her hand or leaned against her shoulder, something inside her softened beyond control. The apartment, once cold and silent, now carried echoes of small laughter and gentle conversations that seemed to thaw the air itself. She noticed how the CEO watched these moments from a distance, unsure how to step into them yet unable to look away. And though neither of them said it aloud, she sensed that the girl was becoming the delicate thread, pulling them towards something they both feared to name. He returned from work earlier than usual, quietly observing from the hallway as they shared a calm moment by the window. The girl's soft chatter filled the room in a way he never managed to create. And though he didn't understand how it happened so quickly, he felt strangely grateful for the peace it brought. Watching them together made something ache in him, a longing he tried to ignore since the day life took everything he loved. And yet, seeing the babysitter bring a warmth he thought he'd lost forever stirred thoughts he wasn't prepared to face. She noticed him standing there, and for a moment their eyes met. It wasn't awkward, yet it wasn't easy either. Something unspoken passed between them, something made of shared exhaustion and quiet loneliness that neither of them had allowed anyone else to see. She looked away first, unsure of what to make of the connection forming in the spaces between their silence. He stepped closer, trying to join the moment instead of hovering outside of it, and she felt an unexpected warmth bloom inside her chest as he tried. As the evening settled in, the apartment felt unusually gentle, like the tension had loosened, letting all three of them breathe the same air without fear. She watched him sit beside his daughter, unsure at first, then slowly relaxing as the girl leaned into him. It was a fragile moment, almost delicate enough to break if any of them moved too quickly. She sensed his longing to be the parent he wished he could be, and felt a quiet admiration she didn't dare put into words. For the first time, she wondered if he needed her just as much as the child did. Later, as she gathered her things to leave, the child wrapped her arms around her in a way that made her pause. The embrace was light but full of trust, the kind that carried memories she had tried to forget. The CEO stood nearby, watching the moment with an expression caught between gratitude and something deeper he wasn't ready to name. She felt her throat tighten as she let the girl cling to her, knowing that her growing attachment only made the truth harder to face. And yet she couldn't bring herself to pull away. She waited until the child fell asleep before opening the old folder she kept hidden at the bottom of her bag. The papers were worn and creased from the years she spent tracing the same lines over and over, searching for the daughter she lost. Her hands trembled as she compared dates, hospital names, and scattered memories she wished she could erase. Every detail pointed her closer to an answer she wasn't sure she was ready to uncover. The truth felt near enough to touch, yet terrifying enough to destroy everything she had begun to build. And still, she couldn't stop herself. He noticed the shift in the air when he returned from work, a kind of uneasy stillness that didn't belong. She tried to hide the folder before he entered the room, but he caught the edge of it in her hand and felt something tighten in his chest. He didn't understand what she was doing, or why she suddenly looked guilty, but her silence made him uneasy. He felt the old fear rise inside him, the same fear that had lived with him since the day he adopted his daughter. The fear that someone might take her away. She tried to explain, but the words tangled in her throat, and the more she struggled to speak, the harder his expression became. The questions in his eyes were sharp, demanding answers she wasn't ready to give. For a brief moment, she saw fear flicker across his face, followed by a coldness she hadn't seen before. It stung more than she expected, as if she had betrayed something fragile forming between them. She felt her heart pounding against her ribs, torn between protecting herself and protecting a truth she wasn't ready for him to hear. His voice rose not out of anger, but out of panic. The kind that comes from a place of deep loss. He demanded to know what she was hiding, why she had files about adoption, and why she looked as though she was carrying a truth that might shatter them both. She felt the weight of his fear and understood it, because she carried her own. The room seemed to close in around them, filled with words neither of them knew how to say. And when she finally whispered that she wasn't ready to explain, something inside him broke. He stepped back from her, his voice dropping to a quiet warning, as he told her he couldn't let secrets near his daughter's life. She understood his fear, but the way he looked at her now felt like a door closing. She wanted to reach out, to tell him everything. About the hospital, the night she lost her baby, the necklace she'd recognized in an instant, but the words caught in her throat. She watched him walk away, feeling the fragile trust they'd built begin to crumble. And even though she wanted to chase after him, her legs wouldn't move. The apartment felt heavier the next morning, filled with an uneasy silence neither of them tried to break. She wanted to leave before he woke, but the child's small hand wrapped around her sleeve made her stay. Her heart ached as she watched the girl eat breakfast quietly, unaware of the storm surrounding her life. She knew she couldn't hide the truth any longer. Not when every moment with the child felt like a fragile promise waiting to shatter. And as his footsteps approached from the hallway, she felt the walls closing in, forcing her toward the moment she feared most. He sat across from her, arms stiff, eyes guarded, waiting for an explanation she could barely breathe through. She felt his distrust like a weight on her skin, heavier with every passing second. The child hummed softly to herself, unaware of the tremor in the air. She opened the folder with shaking hands, laying the papers between them as carefully as if they might break. She couldn't look him in the eye, afraid of what she might see there, afraid of the truth she was about to speak. When she finally told him about the night she gave birth, her voice cracked under the weight of memories she'd spent years trying not to relive. She explained the pressure, the fear, the moment her baby was taken from her arms before she even had the strength to fight. She spoke about the necklace, the tiny star she clung to in the hospital, and the way her heart froze when she saw it around his daughter's neck. The truth spilled out in pieces, fragile and painful, and when she finished, she couldn't tell if she felt relief or devastation. He didn't speak at first. His eyes drifted to the child, then back to the folder, then to the necklace he'd held on to for years without knowing its meaning. Confusion tore through him, followed by fear so sharp it shook his voice when he finally asked if she truly believed the girl was hers. She nodded without hesitation, and something inside him cracked. He thought he had prepared for anything, but nothing could have braced him for the possibility that the daughter he'd built his entire life around might not be his by blood. The moment broke him. He stood abruptly, running a hand through his hair as he stepped away from her. From the truth, from everything he believed was certain. She wanted to comfort him, but she didn't dare move. He whispered that he loved the child more than anything in the world, and couldn't imagine a reality where she wasn't truly his. She felt the words like a sharp pull against her heart, knowing her truth threatened to tear his life apart. And as he walked into the hallway, she realized the truth had not only changed everything, it had shattered the ground beneath them both. He barely slept. The weight of the revelation pushed against his chest with every breath, leaving him wandering the apartment long before sunrise. She stayed in the guest room, listening to the soft creaks of his footsteps as he tried to hold himself together. Neither of them dared to speak, afraid that any word might rupture the fragile quiet between them. She felt guilt coil tightly inside her, wishing she had handled everything differently, but knowing there was never going to be a perfect moment for a truth like this. And as the morning light crept in, all she could think about was the child caught in the middle of two broken hearts. He finally spoke, his voice low and tired, asking her what she planned to do now that the truth was out. She sensed the fear beneath his words, the fear of losing the one person who had anchored him since the day he brought her home. She tried to reassure him she wasn't trying to take anything away from him, but her voice trembled under the weight of her own uncertainty. She didn't know what her place was anymore, or if she even had the right to imagine one. The possibility of losing the child all over again terrified her more than anything she had ever faced. When the child finally woke, she immediately sensed the tension. Her small voice carried a tremor as she asked if something was wrong, and the question struck them both like a blow. He forced a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, trying to protect her from the truth he wasn't ready to share. She watched him struggle, saw the weight of fatherhood pressing against his shoulders, and felt her heart warm with a tenderness she didn't know she could still offer him. She wanted to reach out, but fear held her still, afraid he might see it as another line crossed. He stepped outside for air, leaving her alone in the silent apartment with thoughts that clawed at her chest. She knew he was hurting, but she also understood that the truth had shaken his entire world. She walked to the child's room and watched her play, the innocence in her movements reminding her of everything she had lost and everything she had somehow found again. A tear slipped down her cheek before she could catch it. She didn't know if she had the strength to stay, but the thought of leaving felt like tearing out a piece of her soul. He returned hours later, calmer yet worn down, as if he had fought a battle with himself. He told her he needed time, not out of anger, but because everything he believed about his life had shifted in a single moment. She nodded, feeling the sting of his words, even though she knew he was being honest. He admitted he didn't know how to face the possibility that the child he loved might belong to someone else. Yet he also couldn't imagine pushing her out of his life. The uncertainty settled over them like a heavy fog, but somewhere beneath it, the faintest thread of understanding remained. The days that followed moved gently, as if the world itself knew they needed time to breathe. The tension didn't vanish, but a quieter understanding began to settle between them, soft enough not to break the fragile peace forming in the apartment. She watched the child laugh, watched him soften, watched herself slowly untangle the fear that had lived in her heart for years. Nothing felt certain, yet for the first time since the truth came out, she didn't feel completely alone. And in the stillness of that morning, she realized that healing wasn't a single moment. It was 1,000 small choices to keep trying. He approached her slowly, carrying a quiet vulnerability she hadn't seen in him before. He admitted that he didn't know what the future looked like, but wanted to figure it out together, not as enemies or strangers, but as two people who both loved the same small girl. His voice cracked slightly as he spoke, revealing a tenderness he rarely allowed himself to show. She felt the weight lift from her chest as she listened, knowing this moment was more than an apology. It was a step into something new, something uncertain, but something real. The child tugged gently at her hand, guiding her toward the window as if she sensed the shift happening around her. She felt a deep ache when the girl leaned against her, the kind that came from love, growing in a place she once thought was beyond repair. She glanced at him, seeing the way his eyes softened at the sight, and felt something settle deep within her. Their lives were tangled now, not by accident, but by something that felt like fate, slowly stitching broken pieces together. Later that evening, he invited her to sit beside him on the couch, both of them watching the child draw pictures on the floor. The room felt peaceful in a way it never had before, filled with a sense of belonging none of them had expected. He told her he didn't care what blood said. She had already become part of the child's life, and he didn't want that to change. She felt tears gather in her eyes, not from sadness, but from a rare, gentle hope she had never let herself imagine. maybe love didn't always come the way people expected. Maybe sometimes it found you when everything felt lost. As night settled in, he placed a hand on her shoulder, telling her she didn't have to leave. The invitation wasn't loud or dramatic. It was gentle, heartfelt, and full of the sincerity he had held back for so long. She looked at him, then at the child curled up with her drawings, and felt her heart pull toward both of them with a clarity she couldn't deny. The fear was still there, but it no longer controlled her. What mattered was the little girl who had unknowingly brought them together, and the new beginning waiting quietly between them. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future where none of them had to face anything alone again.